what do we mean by introducing Kanban? So that's kind of a big deal because when we talk about introducing Kanban, we want to acknowledge the fact that there is a culture here that's already existing in the environment. So a lot of times you've already got a culture that's been built over maybe a few years for a new company up to many, many years for an older company. In fact, some companies I've worked with are going on past 100 years of business, which is just kind of mind blowing to think about that they've existed that long. So when we use the word introducing, it's not by accident, it's actually on purpose. It's meant to say that there's something already here, and now we're adding Kanban to this environment. We're not implementing. And oftentimes when I see implementing taking place, and this is just a usage of words, it looks a little bit like this. So it's a bit like chaos to some degree, that people are going to be put onto this train of timeline to deliver a change. We have to do this. It doesn't matter what people think. This is what we're going to do, folks. So let's just go for it, right? We're going to get this thing done in 18 months or 24 months. Here's the schedule to deploy whatever this thing is. And oftentimes the culture feels like it's being put on a fast track and they don't really have much control of the changes coming to them. That's not always the case, but that's something that we pay attention to here at Kanban University. So when it comes to introducing Kanban, we have really two key steps we think about that have a lot more steps beyond them, but in general, two very basic steps. The first one is we have this idea of starting with where you are now. Super simple. And oftentimes where you are is somewhat stressful. There's already stress in the environment. There's probably a stressful reason for why you're doing what you're doing now. We're trying to do X. We're trying to use, for example, I saw a lot of Scrum cards out there. So we're trying to use Scrum to improve our delivery, perhaps. There's one major corporation I know about that earlier this year, they said, hey, everybody, we're going to go to 2-week sprints. That's just the bottom line. Deliver something in 2 weeks. That's it. We don't have to use Scrum, but we want delivery every 2 weeks. So that was fascinating to me that they actually had suggested that, because that adds stress to the whole organization to say, now you've got to produce something. And so people are often already feeling stressed by something in their environment. And then you're adding in Kanban to try and help that stress. So starting with where you are now is super simple. What you're doing is you're not designing the future up front. You're co-defining the current state. And what we're looking for is implementing something on top of the culture. So like I told you guys before, it's adding to this environment. We're giving tools to the individuals to actually work collectively as a group, tools for evolutionary change. Any questions about this so far? I know I'm kind of moving pretty fast here. Okay. Feel free to raise your hand along the way. Some of this may seem really obvious, really common sense, and then the question is how, which I'll get into in a second here. So you do already have experts in your environment. Those are the people who are already employees who are working with you, team leaders, team members, coworkers. They're already ready to help co-define that current state of where you are. And typically what's happening here is there's this problem that already exists, right? We've already got some challenges in front of us. And that's where Kanban really shines, I think, in a lot of cases. When I first started my career with Kanban, I'd often think, wow, this is the thing that you put on the dumpster fires inside organizations, and it works. It actually helps the organization to deal with the problems, the fires that are there. So it typically helps chaos become somewhat balanced and normal, and it takes away that chaotic environment in the business. And so there are two things to think about here, really, in terms of collecting those challenges, collecting that pain. Because sometimes inside your organization, in fact, if you guys want to do the thumbs up here for a second, how many people in your organization struggle to get feedback around pains from your team members or from the people that you're working with? They're like, well, we don't really have any problems here. Everything's okay. Thumbs up if you have that kind of answer given to you on a weekly basis or monthly basis. Yeah. Yeah, certain cultures will be like, oh, we're good. We don't have a problem here. Or individuals inside the organization go, no, we're fine. Sometimes that happens. And so there's this idea of what I call shuttle discovery, which some of you may have heard of the idea of shuttle diplomacy. Basically, shuttle is meaning to walk, or in this case, virtually walk these days, because a lot of us are working remotely. But the idea is basically you talk one-on-one. Like if Sharath and I were talking about, let's say he's a coach or he's responsible as a leader inside part of the business and he wants to try to improve how it works. I would say, hey, Sharath, so what's going on here? Tell me more. So one-on-one type conversations to discover what he would be willing to share with me privately versus share publicly. So kind of building out a map of people one-on-one basically telling us what the pains might be in their environment. And sometimes if you're leading that conversation in a group session to say, hey, here's some of the things I've heard about or learned about. You don't call out people individually, but you say, this is what I'm seeing collectively. That gives them more confidence to say, yeah, that's it. That's our problem. So culturally, sometimes you have to bring this out to the surface and let them understand this is somewhat of what we're seeing as far as pains go. The other way to do this is actually to have short sessions, no more than probably 15 to 20 minutes in duration, where you facilitate a quick gathering of information. You could have 3 of those. The first one is to say, hey guys, let's collect some pains that we know are there and use like a mural or a Miro and have them silently draft out and write out on sticky notes what are some of the challenges they're facing right now and why they might want to change at some point. What's the problem they want to solve? Regardless of what the organization may want to solve, what's their local problem that they need to solve? Sometimes those things align, where the problem they want to solve, same thing problem that the organization wants to solve. But session 1 would be collect those elements, that feedback. Session 2 would be to actually cluster those things and get agreement on, hey, we're going to group these pains together in different categories and see which pains are really meaningful to you guys. Which in session 2 or session 3 could be, let's vote on those things. Which of those things do we really want to try to address as a group going forward? So now we're creating what we call a motivation for change, really a rationalized view of what the pain might be in their space. Now, there's something really interesting that happens here. And in a session I was in yesterday with the Navy, they really hammered on this pretty hard. Actually, some of the generals were nailing this pretty hard. And they said, look, you've got problems all over the place. But the key thing here is to look at the pain and understand it clearly, to actually dig into it a bit more. So you can see here, this software development group had all these different pains provided. But the first pain was something more like, hey, we need to deliver more. And you go, well, great, what do you mean by that? And here's the stuff that came after that. So when you look at pains, when you're collecting this information from people, and they say, we want to deal with this first area of pain really well, let's focus on that. Then I'd ask them to expand on that a bit more as to what the problems really are. Because oftentimes the problem that's presenting itself is hiding other problems underneath it, really important problems that are probably worth challenging and digging into more. So the root cause of this is often not what presents at the surface. I imagine most of you probably understand this concept, but actually doing it in a facilitated workshop kind of session is where the rubber meets the road with Kanban. So then we're trying to say, we understand that you've got pains. Let's pick one pain that's probably the most important, and let's kind of dig and pull apart what that pain looks like. And this is what one group did, for example. They had probably like, what is that, 6 plus 2? So 8 different kinds of pains that they were focusing on. They're saying, this is what we're seeing as our challenge. So from there, let's go back to our board. And what I'd like you to do is where you put your name, we're just going to have you write one little simple thing. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? Is there a problem that you could point out that you could say, hey, we're trying to solve this kind of problem? You don't have to be too specific, obviously, because we don't want to share too much private information here. But next to your name, for example, where you have Major Joe, he might want to put something next to it that says, this is the pain that we're trying to address right now. It can be very generic or something kind of specific. It doesn't matter. Either way, let's see what that looks like. Let's see if you guys have something like that. I'll give you about a minute here to write that down. And for those who just joined, just by any chance, here's the link to that board. And the instructions are there as well in case you need to follow through. And don't forget you have colored cards up there at the top. If you just want to grab one to put it next to yours, feel free to do that. I'll go ahead and create some more. There you go. Okay, just take a few more seconds here to wrap up. I see down here, Meta had said deliver value faster, right? That's kind of a pain. That's a goal for sure. So obviously there's probably a pain underneath that of we're not delivering fast enough. Maybe our delivery rate's not good enough. What we want it to be is X, that kind of thing. And then we have also Serge saying meet expectations and deliver at a sustainable base, basically being predictable. So cool, be predictable, deliver value faster. And let's see, Joe, Major G said using Scrum for enhancement, not really working. Okay. And I believe feel free to unmute, by the way, when you mean enhancements, you mean enhancements to existing products, I believe. If that's incorrect, let us know here. Major Joe. Okay. All right. Okay, so we got, some interesting areas here around sort of the pains that you want to solve. Now, for Meta and for Serge in particular, you might want to pull this apart more, especially at the local level with the groups that you're working with, or at the higher level. Because basically, there's either a higher level view of this problem or a lower level view of this problem, either the problem at the ground level or the problem with the executives or the leaders trying to figure out, are we seeing the right problem? Either way, that's something we want to kind of pull apart here. And Major Joe, you got your hand raised. Yes, sir. Feel free to unmute.
Yeah, using Scrum for enhancing the existing application, and most time you find out that those development work needs to be fixed faster than when you go through Kanban, when you go use Scrum, and you have to go through all those ceremonies. Meanwhile, those enhancements is just a quick fix of, as a user, I just want to be able to make these reports on the existing application. Or as an area manager, I want other permission sets to be given to other GM or area manager partners. So something like that.
Yep. Sometimes, depending on the organization's culture and what you've got going on locally with your Scrum, we refer to those things sometimes as drive-bys. The Scrum team's trying to truck away at work, and then suddenly, can you please add this? Can you please add that? Can you please enhance this? And that work sometimes gets ignored rightfully because the Scrum team's trying to execute their current sprint plan. So I've seen some of that happen before, and that's kind of what this sounds like a little bit of. And we'll dive into that a little bit more too. Smita also said in chat here that the team does not know why they would use Kanban. They're not familiar with it and are thrown into it. So this is an interesting piece that we'll get into, but my argument here is that really it's not so much why they would use Kanban, but what would they use from it if they're going to use anything from it. So does it solve a problem or it doesn't? If it doesn't solve a problem for them, they may not need to use Kanban, to be honest. They may not see the value in it. That's okay. But what we're going to show you here now is sort of how we pull apart problems, how we look at potential solutions. And that might give you some ideas here, Smita, of what to look for in terms of maybe does this add value to the Scrum team, for example. Let's go back to the presentation for a second and kind of walk through that. So remember, the first step was to pull apart the problem. We just went through a very, very simplistic exercise for what that looks like. And keep in mind, it could be that you want to pull this apart a lot more with your teams and have them choose which one of these things they really want to work on. I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a second. But the second step really is to say, what's the experiment here? So now that we know our problem, for example, Meta had said more value, deliver more value. So now that we know that problem, what are potential solutions to that problem? This is where you're getting everyone to do that with. So I saw a lot of orange stickers, I believe, so mostly Scrum teams. So it's a team effort at this point to say, hey, we all agree that this is probably the thing to work on. Some people in the Scrum team might be like, yeah, that's it. Some people might be like, well, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with this. And that's okay. You want to try and keep moving forward with the momentum that's there to see if you can learn something. So the second step is really about experimentation and learning. And when we look at this, there's a good chance that there's already a stressor in the environment, like we talked about, like you guys already showed us. The enhancement problem that Joe's talking about, the value of more, the delivery of more value, like Meta is talking about, and then predictability, which another person was talking about. Those are the problems. That's the stressor coming probably to the team to say, can you do this from management or something along those lines? So along with that, you want to say, what's the idea to solve it? Now, in the Kanban method, this is where it gets to be kind of fun. By the way, I'm talking Kanban. You don't have to use the word Kanban at all in your environments. You might say, hey, look, let's frame this problem a little differently, and let's see what we can do to pull some tools in to maybe solve the problem. The tool piece really are the practices from the Kanban method. And if you've ever heard of something called the Kanban maturity model or looked at it, there are lots of practices hiding underneath the hood around 6 dominant practices. And those are visualization, limiting work in progress practices, and there are lots of them actually. Managing the flow, which is kind of the biggest deal, I think, for everyone here, either delivering more value or becoming more predictable. Managing flow practices are really helpful there. There's also setting explicit policies, which is what we get into a lot in the Kanban method. And that's sort of the idea that what we've discovered now really sticks well. Let's make that explicit, whatever that is. Maybe limiting work in progress activities is one example of making something explicit. And last but not least, what we're doing right now, experimenting collaboratively and evolving thoughtfully here. So really, that's what the reflection piece is saying, hey, who has ideas for this problem? All ideas are good ideas. We have to figure out if they're reasonable ideas. We'll talk about that in a second, how to figure out which ones are reasonable. And then last but not least, action on the idea. So you as individuals here in this call, you might be thinking, wow, it's all on my shoulders. That's not the case at all. We often look for other individuals to help co-lead or directly lead some kind of change that's small in form, that's experimental in form in that local environment. It could be your tech lead, could be your team lead, could be your QA person, could be your project manager, could be your boss, and not you. So you have to look at the picture and figure out where's the best place to do that kind of leadership. I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. Remember, by the way, though, like I was saying earlier, it's about finding the right problems. And so really, we're looking for defining that carefully. So I saw Serge ask a question a second ago. We will talk about that in just a second, Serge. Be happy to answer that for you. But in this case, General Mattis, who I listened to yesterday actually live, he said, look, the biggest issue here around critical thinking and improving organizational change is defining the problem clearly. So spend time hanging out in the problem space, because often more than not, it's treated very lightly because there's a lot of energy in the room saying, oh, well, this is the problem. This is it. So you got to get curious and help people understand to poke around in the problem space quite a bit. Here's a good example of that. Someone had asked Albert Einstein a while ago, when he was still around, how would he solve a problem if he had 60 minutes? The world's going to end. How would you actually solve for that problem? Generic kind of question. He said, well, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem, investigating the problem, and then probably minutes thinking about a solution and coming up with an answer. So keep in mind, that's a really great way to think about how we're talking through this particular area of evolutionary change. Oftentimes, the problem is really, really valuable when you find the right problem. But as you're learning how to do this, and forgive yourselves, by the way, you may pick the wrong problem. You may pick the weak problem or too big of a problem. And you're going to learn that through your feedback cycles. So you may run an experiment for a couple of sprints or a few weeks or 4 weeks and realize, oof, we bit off more than we could chew. I did that once with test-driven development, learned it the hard way. So keep that in mind. That's a key factor in this. Now, here are the 4 things I tend to look at with the problems. So as you're trying to gather the problems like we talked about earlier, remember we have the stress, we have the problem. People are going to share that with you guys. Like you've already shared some with me. You're probably going to have a lot coming at you. The challenge here is to ask a simple question of the people sharing the problem. They have to rate this, by the way, not you. You can facilitate this, but you can say, hey guys, so what do we see here in terms of the ability to influence this problem? Can we easily influence it? Is it local to our area? Or is it something that we would just dream of that would be ideal if we could have it done? We could have it fixed. And that's where that scope of yes versus somewhat to not really, really matters. And sometimes they don't know. No one knows. You're like, I don't know if we can do this. I don't know if the problem is easily influenced or not. So that's just something to know. We might be able to give it a try, make a change happen. So we've got 4 different categories here. You probably could come up with a few more if you wanted to. I don't think there's any problem with that. But usually there are 4 buckets in which the problems kind of fall. And the ones in the yes bucket are probably the ones that are first to start with. The only reason I suggest that is because when you have a few small wins, in particular, having small discoveries that are local to the environment where they can learn and develop the capability to continue learning, that's a humongous deal. That's a humongous confidence booster. The team feels more confident about exploring in the problem space and exploring solutions and thinking about it in an evolutionary form, right? Evolutionary means we're going to try something. We might fail and roll back to where we were, try again, keep trying to achieve an outcome, but also learning along the way and listening to what we've discovered. Sometimes what you think you're going to achieve might not be as valuable as you try to achieve it. You realize you might have to pivot. So here's the thing that we think about. Multiple experiments, right? Sometimes we might need that. It's hypothesis-driven change in particular. Basically, we don't know if this is going to work or not work. So when we come up with ideas, we're thinking this might work, this might happen. So usually around a single problem, you're going to have 2 or 3 ideas. And again, I kind of rate the ideas around how easy are they to pull off. Which ones are going to be easy easy ideas to execute and learn from? Which ones are going to be hard? So if you guys don't mind, in the chat session here, give me an example of something you tried that you realized that was way too hard. Like for me, test-driven development with a brand new team, I went way too fast, way too hard. Anyone have an example of something else that they might have? Feel free to write it there in the chat. I guess people are probably still getting their breakfast or thinking it through, maybe having some lunch. Yeah, story points, that's a good one, Shara. You know, trying to use story points for the first time can be somewhat shaky, somewhat hard to do. Could fail doing that, could be easy to do that. But that's something that is really fun to try out with and say, does that improve what we're doing? Oh yeah, Serge, sprint goals. Another great one. I've seen a lot of people struggle with sprint goals. Honestly, they've had a hard time succeeding in doing that kind of thing to define it, primarily around the collaboration piece of it. So let's set up a sprint goal. Well, then we don't get the feedback or the input we need to actually define that sprint goal. So that's a key thing to be thinking about here is actually how do you get that input effectively when you're executing an experiment like that? Do you get the collaboration you're looking for? So we're not looking for just technical, pure execution of process or something. Sometimes it's simply saying, are we all going to agree to actually behave a certain way? And does that behavior show up or does it not?
While we're in the chat, Serge has a question.
Yeah. So let's see here. Stakeholders feedback. Yeah, absolutely, Major Joe. So I saw Serge have a question there. Let's go ahead and jump into that just for a second here. What's your definition of a method versus methodology? Are they the same? So I tend to look at a methodology as something that is more detailed and described, and it has a certain sequence of things that are tied to it. And then a method is more like a grab bag of different practices and tools that typically show up as a way of evidence effective things at work. So I tend to look at a method as different areas where you can focus and apply things, where the methodology tends to be somewhat prescriptive, not explicitly prescriptive like a framework might be. But in fact, actually, a methodology probably is more prescriptive than a framework, now that I'm thinking about it. So a framework is intentionally left blank. There are parts of a framework where just gaps are intentional there, where the people who create the framework say, look, you fill in what works best for you, local to your context. A methodology is more like, hey, we want you to do A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, and you shouldn't miss any of these things along the way. That's kind of how I see it. That's my interpretation of methodology, and framework. Method is going to be a grab bag of tools that say, hey, look, here's some things that might help you along the way. And that's what the Kanban method is. Speaking of which, funny thing that you brought this up, Serge, is we actually have this little guy right here. So if you guys want to pull out your phones really briefly, take a picture of this QR code. This is a free download that explains that difference as well. So we actually call out what's method, methodology, and framework in this guide. And we also have a lot more information around the Kanban method. So if you're new to the Kanban method, and some of you are from what I could tell, this is a great way to round out your knowledge really quickly. You could probably read it this afternoon and be done with it pretty quickly. It's a visual, but also good detailed description of what the Kanban method is, how it works, what you can do with it. Very good starter component. Also great for executives, by the way. I got to admit, executives love pictures, and there are pictures in this thing. So FYI, very helpful there. So final bit here for sort of what this looks like. So I think some of you are asking, like, how does this look, right? Here's how it looks. You've got basically, in this example here, a problem in the bottom left. Quality assurance bottleneck. Quality assurance is killing us. They're slow. We're in a matrix organization. It's just eating us alive. But what are 4 ideas that might actually help you? Well, we could expand our workflow. So this is one of the techniques out of the Kanban method, managing flow, visualizing that flow. So what do we do to visualize workflow more thoughtfully? How does that help us understand what QA is doing? Where are they putting their attention? What's getting focused on? And where the delays might be happening underneath the hood around this bottleneck. So remember how we talked about value faster earlier from Meta? Not that this is her problem, but this could be an example of what the problem might be underneath the hood. There might be quality assurance is really slow. How do we fix that? And same thing for the other person there that said, let's get more sustainable, predictable outcomes for our group. It might be that the bottleneck's eating up both of those problems, right? And here's what the group involved in delivering this work said, let's focus on these 4 things as experiments. So the workflow expansion, making sure we actually talk about it. I hate to say it, but it's very important to try and talk. Sometimes collaboration doesn't happen, and that's an experiment on its own. And then from there, metrics, actually using some metrics to figure out where you're going, and realizing that metrics may not be the final answer. They just kind of indicate if you're going in the right direction or maybe not. And then lastly, look at the work in progress, see what happens. Don't even try to limit it, but just see what happens. Does it increase? Does it decrease over certain periods of time? This is something we call observation, and it's part of what we call the OODA loop in the Kanban method. It's a general thing, but we use it a lot in the Kanban method. This is a good example of what you might see come out of these kind of conversations. We got one problem, and we got 4 or 5 ideas to maybe attack the problem. Awesome. Those are all experiments to try. How you try them out, when you try them out, it varies, but this is a great way to get started. Now, one thing to keep in mind too is that this isn't all of it, right? This is a complex environment. I know a lot of people have heard talks around complex systems, all that stuff. I just think of it as human-powered systems, which means there's a lot going on here. So reality happens. I can't tell you how many times I've been in sessions with people where they get reorganized the day after, or they're getting reorganized while I'm talking to them. It's happened before. And so reality will hit a company pretty hard. Even though they're trying to go in one direction, reality pushes them in a different direction. So it's actually a nonlinear thing when we talk about change. It's not going to be that suddenly we just have a happy day scenario and change works out perfectly. Sometimes it does, and that's humongous. That's great. Count your blessings when you have those calm days. But things will happen sometimes. Your changes won't go as planned. They go sideways for a number of reasons, or they need to be stopped because they're actually not productive. They're actually wasting time or hurting people's focus or productivity. That's when you have a signal right there, feedback right there, that this is not worth continuing on. And then some changes have to be rolled back. So in my case with TDD, test-driven development, we went through 4 or 5 attempts at trying to do it and failing to do it well. But we learned along the way. We got better and better at figuring out what do we need to do to effectively succeed with test-driven development. This was back in 2017, 2016. So back before there was ChatGPT, which now probably can do it for you. And last but not least, every change you go through is going to teach you something. So as you try to change, you're going to find resistance. You're going to find hurdles that you might not have thought about, or other problems that are more important to solve right now. That's okay. That's okay to pivot and say, wait a minute, we need to focus on this problem first before we can focus on the problem that we were trying to address originally. So give yourselves that kind of freedom to say, wait a minute, we might need to pivot here because we're learning how to work in this environment and how to change it. And that's really what we're talking about with the Kanban method. We're introducing a management method for change, introducing evolutionary change as a vehicle for introducing better outcomes for organizations. So let's take a quick look at your initiative. One final thing here and see how it's going. I wanted to also look at any questions you guys had.
We can take questions for 10 more minutes. So please, how to estimate in Kanban? Smita has a question on the chat.
Yeah, okay, that's a great one. T-shirt or Fibonacci, I love it, I love it. So really, Kanban looks more at estimation around the ability of, I guess, predictability and forecasting. So the way it looks is you might be starting off with Fibonacci or T-shirt. That's fine. Do what works for you. What we tend to find that really is powerful is using lead time relative to something like a T-shirt or Fibonacci. And I've done this before, by the way. I've actually used T-shirt sizing with lead time analysis to see, is there a relationship here? Can I find something that means something to me as far as, are we spending good time doing T-shirt sizing? Sometimes the team wants to do that because it matters to them to say, this is how big this effort really is, and kind of set expectations. As you mature with that, though, you'll probably find that you can use lead time. So in our trainings, for example, with what Sharath could teach you, there's quite a bit that goes into why we look at lead time, why we look at throughput, and why we look at work in progress. There's this really interesting relationship around those 3 variables. And as you get good at managing that kind of information, you can actually kind of move beyond T-shirt or Fibonacci and say, in general, if it's this type of work, right? So it's a user story, but it's a user story targeting a database or targeting a certain feature set on the platform. It's going to tell a story over time that is a lead time story. And you can really start to see clearly how much time on average this work will take. And that kind of starts to move away from the idea of using T-shirt or Fibonacci to more of like, hey, you want 4 or 5 of these things we can tell you that 4 or 5 of these things will take this much time on average for us to deliver. You can start to forecast more or less the performance of the system using the historical performance. So we step away from Fibonacci, we step away from t-shirt sizing, but initially it might feel like the right thing to do, and that's a-okay. I would just say that over time, we move more in that direction of using the data from that environment, not so much forecasting what we think it'll do from like a t-shirt size or Fibonacci. That's sort of the short answer. And you say, as the team does not even know what estimation looks like and how it is measured, right? So if the team doesn't know it, I would probably move them more in the direction of saying, let's go ahead and jump into looking at lead time data first, so you're more aware of the system and its current performance. We don't have to sit down and educate you too much on that. It's pretty self-evident as we work with that data. And then Joe says, how do you determine the best framework to use for a particular project or product development? You know, if I had to choose right now, because I do a little bit of product development work and I use Kanban for my product development work because I kind of live and breathe the product itself. That's sort of what I choose. But what I'm looking for are 2 things with sort of project or product development. The first thing is, can we actually get feedback in and talk about it? So how is feedback coming through in this environment? And then the loop part that we pay attention to, which is, can we act on this feedback effectively? So I'm looking to discover along the way, even if it's a project with a fixed schedule, I'm discovering how is the team succeeding in doing the project work? What hurdles are they running into? And can we address those hurdles? And that's going to create smoother flow, reduce the lead time. And that's what I'm looking for there. So if there's a particular framework I'm looking for, it's going to be one of those that works well with the team's culture, that fits well. So if they're already doing something that's close to what it looks like as far as the framework or the product of doing this, I'm going to choose that thing. But even then, I may not advertise it. One of the things that people run into is that their identity is wrapped around something. As soon as I introduce something new, it's going to throw off their identity a little bit, and they may not like that. So I may just say yes and. So if they say we do the SDLC 2.5 framework, cool guys, how about we have a conversation around how work is getting done, and if we can improve that way of working. If they already have that built into their framework, whatever it's called, then you're probably in good shape at that point. But if you're not, that's probably where you want to use what I showed you guys today to kind of pull apart what are the problems with that framework and how do we improve it. Let's see here. So other good questions. Smita's digging into this big time. Is estimation more aligned to time taken to complete work, or complexity as well, dependencies? So estimation in this light would be more or less, we're forecasting how long it takes for us to get something done, either an individual piece of work or a package of work. That package could be a project, for example. And yeah, a lot of times groups and individuals can't foresee the future, but a lot of training is out there to say, hey, let's predict all the things that could go wrong with our work. And you can do some of that, and that can be a little bit helpful, but what really helps to say, what have we realized? What do we know right now after a couple of weeks or a few weeks of doing the work? And from that will be the dependencies that are revealed and other types of delay. So that's a key thing to be thinking about here. We talk about that in our KSI class, or Kanban Systems Improvement class, really dig into delay a lot right there to help understand what is it that's causing impact negatively on potential forecasting or thinking through how the future might look. And does Kanban imply doing volunteering work as team? Does not assign work to themselves like Scrum? That depends, honestly. I've seen Kanban teams that actually do a little bit of assignment of work. They say, hey, can you please help out here? Can you please help out there? But it depends on your culture. I've seen organizations that use a matrix organizational structure where it's resource assignment, where it's way big business for them to say, you know, Ashara, you're going to be doing 20% over here and 30% over there in terms of your work for projects. And so Ashara doesn't really have a choice. It's kind of where he has to go. So we work in that space as well with Kanban. But there are places where the team can simply say, hey, we're building a product. And you know, today I really would like to work with Sharth because he's an expert on database systems, and I want to learn from him so we can kind of cross-train a little bit. That can happen as well. So it just depends. Yeah.
I think, you know, not having ceremonies is a myth in Kanban. We have it, but as many as required, not more or not less. If you have two scale around enterprise, then it's about 16 ceremonies that we are talking about, right? In KSD, KSI, KC, KM. So in the team level, when you're talking, it's 3 or 4, but there's 16 different ceremonies that you have to have the synchronous between the teams and then interact and have that cadence and all of those. So that's a myth. When you start to getting KU material and start learning this, you will see that that's not what it is. So you will see it in a different way.
Yeah. You make a good point there, Sharth. It's basically we tend to have higher quality collaboration, and we tend to have maybe a fewer less ceremonies if you're looking at Kanban purely by itself. But it's a management method, so you can apply it on top of your existing way of working. So it can be applied on top of Scrum, for example, to help out the Scrum ceremonies if they're there. And let's see, Scrum events with team experience planning. So Kanban wouldn't necessarily encourage the Scrum events if you're not doing them, Smita. If you're already working with something else, we'd say improve what you've got there. So if a lot of you guys are already doing Scrum, so we'd say let's take a look at your Scrum and let's improve your Scrum where you find problems to exist. So just keep that in mind. That's how we would look at it. If your Scrum's working well for you, I don't want to get in the way of that. If your Scrum has some problems, we might have some solutions for you there.
But then again, adding more onto that, right? Even if you're doing Scrum, there are a few practices that will definitely help any of the framework or methodology that you're doing. You're doing safe, waterfall, Kanban itself, you're doing it right and great. But if you're doing something else, there are some practices in Kanban, or if not all, but not everything could be done when you're doing, different frameworks or methodologies. But there are some things that could be used in every methodology or framework that you guys are doing. And it will definitely add value to you if you're doing that.
Yeah.
So it's regardless of which specific framework you all are using, whether it's Scrum or Kanban or XP, etc.
Right. So you can, sorry, Joe, if I can answer and then you can let me know if
Yeah.
that's
Go for it.
So he's my trainer. So yes, that's right, Smita. You can use Kanban above any of the frameworks. If you wish to introduce Kanban altogether, it's fantastic. But if you cannot, and if your organization, pushes you to use one framework, there are practices that you can use in any of the frameworks, and it will definitely show you good benefits. Now, we have seen lots of teams using Kanban practices when they get stagnant with Scrum, Safe, and other frameworks that they were using. Yes, Scrum is great, Safe is great. What next? We are stagnant. We are not doing anything great from what we are doing from last few months, years, weeks. Yes, so let's start using these practices which will boost us more. So what are those? You will learn that part of the course. And a lot of them you can find online, some of them on our website too. But if you want a formal education, definitely certification. But yes, that is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing to emphasize here with what he's talking about, Smita, just so that everyone's aware, which at first I was like, well, this is just how we do things, but I'm realizing more and more how powerful this is. When you go to the training that we have, it's not just necessarily knowledge checking to say, oh, you understand these things. It's literally that probably half or more than half of our training is exercise based. So we put you through a lot of exercises to help you wrap your head around this stuff, because we know it's not easy. And usually people go, whoa, that was a lot of good thinking, fun work in terms of learning how to do this. So while you get a certification, all this stuff out of our training, which is kind of standard, I think, for a lot of companies, I think what we really offer to people who are really into this or want to know more about it is the exercise-based learning, where we really dive into these materials quite a bit, and you can apply these concepts typically to your own environment right there while you're going through the training. So it's really fun stuff. I have to admit, I like it.
Yeah, and if you're in a position where you're trying to implement a Kanban or trying to get those practices, the link that I put would be the best place to start for you. It will, even if you're doing Scrum or Safe, it's basically the board, design of your Kanban board that you're talking on. Even if it's in Jira, if it's Scrum, you have that exact board where you are tracking your work on Jira. Considering Jira, you're using Jira, most of them. So you can set up those boards. What we will teach here is how you can use Kanban to set up the board in a best way, which is help for transparency, tracking, and all of the best practices. So that would be the course that you would be taking in order for you to get those practices in a best way. If you're in a place where you're implementing Scrum Master, Manager, that kind of roles. I think we are out of time. We'll just give one more question. If they have anything, then we'll wrap up. One last question, guys. Anything that you guys have? One last question.
You would be sharing this video, right? I mean, this recording?
Yes, we will put this on Agile Fever YouTube channel, and also we'll be sharing through emails.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, then, Joey, thank you so much for joining us. I think it was a great session. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you again, Joey, for being with us here and running through this. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Have a good one, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.